reporting. Let's get some more on all of this. The former U.S. Attorney and CNN senior legal analyst Preet Bharara is with us, and the former FBI special agent, CNN legal and national security analyst Asha Rangappa is with us as well. Preet, it's one thing to know Giuliani said this, but it's another thing to actually hear him say it and say it so brazenly. It's pretty shocking what he was putting forward, this quid pro quo.
Yeah, look, I agree. So some of the information is not new. But as we've seen in other contexts in courtrooms around the country, if you have video or you have audio, and if you're lucky enough to have both, then that crystallizes and brings to life the conduct of the person who's being examined, and that's true here. Rudy Giuliani, in a pressing tone, asking for things that only make sense in the political context that he was in that year, and that is that President Trump and the people around him were very concerned about a political rival, not about corruption in Ukraine or in the United States, but a political rival by the name of Joe Biden. And he says very clearly, and this was a feature of discussion around the first impeachment trial, that what's incredibly telling, and you hear it in the voice of Rudy Giuliani, is he's not necessarily even asking for an investigation. He emphasizes the importance of an announcement of an investigation because that would have the political effect of hurting a rival, Joe Biden. And Joe Biden turned out to be the most significant rival to Donald Trump and ended up winning the election. So their fears were well founded. How Giuliani and others reacted and dealt with that fear, that political fear, is awful, as I think any reasonable person would say.
You know, and Asha, you clearly hear Giuliani dangle the possibility, in his words, of a much better relationship with then President Trump if the Ukrainians were to deliver the dirt on Biden. That sounds like a pretty clear, once again, as I say, quid pro quo, doesn't it?
Yes. Well, let's remember that President Zelensky had just been elected. And so this was conditioned, or what the White House was suggesting is that they would condition a visit to the White House on Ukraine announcing this investigation. You know, the president of the United States has the recognition power. Offering a state visit to another foreign leader, particularly after they have just been elected, is highly symbolic. That is an Article 2 function. It's an official act. And so what is really happening here is a quid pro quo using an official function of the office of the presidency as leverage in order to get a personal election benefit. And this goes exactly to the abuse of power. I'd argue that it's actually bribery, both of which are impeachable offenses. And this is just more of a smoking gun if you needed one after the perfect phone call transcript that we had during that trial.
So based on what we're hearing from Asha, Preet, what, if anything, could this potentially mean for Giuliani's already rather substantial legal troubles?
So, I would say that the term quid pro quo applies. The irony here is that Rudy Giuliani, in his conversation that we just heard played, refers to something that Joe Biden was doing as bribery. What he's actually doing in the phone call, referring to that conduct by Joe Biden, seems more like bribery to me. The problem legally, if the question is, does he have criminal exposure, there are challenges to such a thing. One is whether or not, the thing that's being requested is a thing of value. There might be some debate about that, the announcement of an investigation in connection with a political campaign. Second, Giuliani himself is not someone who is capable in his own right, because he's a private citizen at the time, in his own right of engaging in an official action. And then he was not very explicit about what might happen and what favors might be, able to be benefiting Ukraine. And so there's a question of concreteness there. You could make the argument that he was in a conspiracy with other people, including Donald Trump. But I think that the greater liability that Rudy Giuliani faces is from my prior office, the Southern District of New York, in connection with a different criminal investigation.
All right, Preet, thank you very much. Asha, thank you to you as well.